to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws. This is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the love on our last video. It was a really fun and interesting segment that we did, and you can expect more content on that level from us. But before we get into today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on our noti bell, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the OBT Podcast to stay connected with us. Um, but for today's episode, we've got to kick it off with some breaking news. Ja Morant, we all know who he is. We all know what he's done, but he was suspended 8 games without pay. So, and he's expected to return on March 20th. So that should be Monday, I believe. And he was previously in a counseling program in Florida due to his recent off the court issues. We all know what they are. And he was also interviewed by Jalen Rose of ESPN, in which he stated that the gun was not his, which coincided with the NBA's investigation where they found the same. So, it's a good thing that he's going to be back and, back with the team and back to playing basketball, which is, his job. So not too many complaints from me. And, it's a little bit different than the Gilbert Arenas situation because I've been seeing people try and say the NBA, showed a little bit of favoritism to Ja or something, like pampered him or, didn't come down as hard as they did on Arenas. But, the difference is if that wasn't Ja's gun, then it's not as big of a deal as Arenas bringing a gun into the training facility and the arena. That's illegal. That is 100% illegal. So, it's a bad look for Ja in terms of what he did, but he's ready to move on from it. As he said in the interview, he knows that he messed up, and he's getting ready to play basketball again. So I just don't want people to compare the Gilbert Arenas situation to the Ja Morant situation because they're completely different.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I know, a lot of people, including ourselves, kind of like crack jokes about it when it first happened. But, the most important thing is that he gets his life figured out and his situation figured out.
Right.
At a young age, you are allowed to make mistakes. Everybody does it, not necessarily to the same degree, but still. But the good news for him is that hopefully he continues to get things under control, and he can get back to playing basketball and help out his team. Because he put his team and himself in a really tough spot. Having to try to compete in a tough wide open Western Conference without him. But it seems like he'll be back pretty soon. I know that they said his return from his suspension is March 20th, but they did say he'll probably need a little bit of time physically to ramp up, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it may, maybe it's a week, maybe it's not much longer than that. But obviously, like we said, this is huge news, for a team that obviously, they've done pretty well without him for the most part, even dating back to last year. But obviously, if they want to get to where they really want to go to, they need him, right? Because you can't win a title with your best player being unavailable. And as long as he's available, they do have a shot.
Yeah.
So but overall, this is good news because we don't want to see, a guy like this who's a superstar that has a huge influence, throw his career away over, just silly stuff. So it's good to see that he took accountability. Moving on into the next topic, we kind of wanted to discuss, I guess, some hypothetical potential playoff matchups. So we each took 4 matchups that we wanted to see. Potentially, again, things can change depending on what happens with the standings and where people are. But a lot of these matchups could potentially happen depending on where these last couple of weeks go. So the first one I have is the Sixers and the Knicks. I think that would kind of be a fun, entertaining matchup.
Oh yeah.
Obviously, you got Joel Embiid as the best player on the floor. But Randall, Jalen Brunson, Barrett, since they've added guys like Quentin Grimes into the starting 5, of course they got Josh Hart. I think they've definitely improved as a team defensively, and also just in terms of just having smart guys making good plays. But then you also, again, you have a matchup problem with the Sixers. I mean, because Joel Embiid is one of the best players in the league. He's a tough matchup for any team. The Knicks have a lot of size and physicality that they can throw at him, so that can kind of be entertaining. And when the Knicks are at their best, it's kind of weird because there are times where they look kind of fun, and then other times where it looks kind of weird just because of Randall's style of play is not for everybody. Obviously, you have Harden, right? He's going to be an entertaining matchup, along with Tyrese Maxey to see what they do against the Knicks. So this is a playoff matchup that I think would be cool, and of course, you get some playoff matchups in the Garden. That's one of the
Yeah,
best places to play in the league. So
for
this
sure.
is potentially a matchup that I would love to see, but it kind of depends right now. The Knicks and the Nets are kind of going back and forth in the standings. They'd have to be sixth. But I'm sure the Knicks would prefer to be five as opposed to six. So if they're five, they'll probably play Cleveland. But
Yeah.
this is an interesting matchup for me. What about you?
Yeah, I like that one a lot, to be honest. And it's going to be interesting because to be honest, in my opinion, it could really go both ways. The Knicks they're going to fight for every point. That's just the team that they are, and with Phillies, somewhat thin roster, I could really see them, upsetting them, to be honest. But I'm not going to count Philly out completely. I just don't
Yeah.
think that they can beat the higher seeds, but they do have a very high chance of beating the lower seeds. I think they're somewhat miles ahead of the teams below them as well. So I
Yeah.
would like that. It would be cool to see
Yeah.
Randall versus Embiid. Something like
Yeah.
that. That would be really cool.
Yeah, they have been playing really good basketball. They've
Very
been winning like what, 5, 6 straight games.
yeah. Embiid's
Um,
unstoppable. Like it's
exactly. So
ridiculous.
and exactly. So I mean, like Philly's been really, really good. So it's like I don't want to necessarily harp on them too negatively.
Right.
It's just we've talked about it multiple times. Everybody knows how we feel about Philly. So,
Yeah.
but still, it'd be a fun matchup.
Yeah. It'd be really cool. For my first matchup in the East, I have Cavs Nets, and the reason I wanted to choose this one or I want to see it is because like with the Cavs, I think this will be a good test for them. Because there are some doubts with the Cavs. Very streaky bench. We've talked about that multiple times in the podcast as well. Your favorite saying is, "How are you gonna have a scorer that doesn't score?" In Karis LeVert. So, and then you've got Chetty Osman, who's a decent shooter, but I think yesterday he had some really bad misses, like critical ones too. So a few air balls, but that's just one game. But that's just an example of what can happen with the Cavs team. Mobley kind of got let's just say manhandled by Embiid. It's very rough. So, but in regards to the Nets, like I think it would just be a good matchup because we'd be seeing a lot of young guys go up against each other, a lot of core rotational people go up against each other. And in my opinion, the Nets don't necessarily have a superstar yet. I think they have a star in Mikal Bridges, up and coming superstar because now he's coming into his own um, you know, situation and environment. So I really like that. And I think, we could potentially see some really exciting games. I think they're going to be very evenly matched, unless, playoff Donovan Mitchell decides to make a grand entrance, during this uh, series. But I don't know. I just really like the feel of it. It just has a ring to it. Cavs versus Nets.
Right.
And like I said, it'd just be a bunch of young guys going up against each other, mixed in with some veterans and some really clutch players. That's one thing we left or that I left out. There's some clutch players on both sides. So
Yeah, exactly. There's definitely a lot to like about this matchup. Of
yeah,
course, you got Garland and Mitchell as a backcourt, with Mobley getting better in his second year with
right,
Jared Allen, who's a big body, obviously. They got some issues wing wise, and of course, Brooklyn has a lot of wings that they can throw at those guys, right? They got guys like Mikal Bridges, who's a terrific defender, Royce O'Neal, who can still do some things even at this point. He's
right,
been kind of up and down, but still. Um, and then, of course, you got Dorian Finney-Smith, Nick Claxton, who's not a wing, but as a center, as a shot
yeah,
blocker, rebounder, he can cause some issues. So, but like you said, for the Cavs, they're going to have the best player on the floor with Donovan Mitchell, and I don't really think it's that close between him and Bridges, even though Bridges has been very good.
it's not
Um,
close.
but yeah, I think Mitchell is the guy that has the superstar impact. So I think that one is probably more likely to go Cleveland's way.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, but of course it would still be an entertaining matchup, and it's just cool that Brooklyn's still been able to maintain being a
Exactly.
good playoff team even without Durant and Kyrie and even
Yeah,
Harden, who they moved a year ago. So I just think it'd be a kind of definitely a cool matchup to see, just as a battle of two very different teams.
yeah. I think it would be a great test for both,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah. And especially with the Nets, you got a lot of really good shooters, right? You have,
Yep.
of course, Bridges, right?
Yep.
Dorian Finney-Smith's a good shooter, right? But you also have like guys like Seth Curry,
Yep.
Patty Mills, Joe Harris. I don't know how many of those guys will necessarily play come playoff time, but
Right.
they all can hit knockdown shots.
Yeah.
So I like that team. So I
Should be
think that'd be
great.
really
Yep.
yeah. So for my second matchup, Not as interesting, I suppose, but definitely one that would kind of be, I guess, kind of funny as a rematch. Bucks Hawks.
Okay.
The rematch that I don't even know if as many people have even remembered that one. That
Right.
was a conference finals matchup
Yeah.
just a couple seasons ago, right? Because the Hawks made that improbable run,
Yeah.
beating the number 1 seed Philadelphia
Crazy.
76ers, and they yeah, exactly, and they played the Bucks in the conference finals. Took them to 6 games too, so it was a
Yep.
really competitive series. The Bucks had to close it out without Giannis because that's when he had his knee injury, I think.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, the Hawks haven't really been that great this year. Trading for DeJounte Murray, he's been good, I think, but it doesn't seem like it's helped enough. Kind of like the Gobert situation in Minnesota,
Right.
where again, these are not bad players. They just, they gave up a lot to get those guys, and they haven't gotten to where they want to go. Even after firing Nate McMillan, and getting Quinn Snyder, who used to coach Utah. I mean, like it's still kind of been a similar thing, but it's kind of what we talked about, where we thought they probably might be a little better, but probably not that much better just because, it's pretty clear there's also just issues with the roster.
Yeah.
Shooting's been pretty bad for most of the year. Even from Trey Young, right, who's got a reputation as a good shooter, but there's been a couple of seasons where his percentages aren't always that great. But this one is, I think, really an outlier for how low it is. Um, and again, of course, I know he didn't get along with McMillan, in terms of like, a lot of other things, but
Right.
just in general, it's just been a really tough season for them. But still, it would kind of be interesting to see them take on the Bucks again, just to see, if they can unlock something come playoff time. I mean, you know, DeJounte Murray as a defensive guard, can potentially maybe it can slow down maybe Holiday or Middleton. And they still have a decent amount of size. It's just that shooting has been so bad.
Yeah.
And I also don't, I mean, they're not going to be able to stop Giannis, but I just think it'd be an interesting matchup just from the perspective of a rematch, just to see how those two teams have changed since then. Because the Bucks, I mean, have still been really good this season.
For sure.
Even after 2 years after they won the title. So,
Yeah. It would be interesting to me too, just because
mm,
of how poetic it would be for these teams to face off again. Um, but like you said, I don't foresee Atlanta beating the Bucks at all, just because of how good the Bucks are and how mediocre Atlanta's been this season, unfortunately. But it hopefully, Trey Young has some playoff moments. I'll never root against a guy like that. The only person I'll probably root against is Dylan Brooks, but you know, I just don't really think that just Trey Young and DeJounte Murray's enough to get past the Bucks, so I'm gonna mark this one off as a loss for the Hawks, but it would still be cool to see just from the pure perspective of the rematch. Um, so yeah, for my second team, I have a more interesting matchup, somewhat, I guess you can call it that. Celtics Heat. So
yeah.
I think this is one to watch potentially. If the standings stay the same. Um, and mainly because the Heat are not a dark horse in my opinion. I think they've just had a bad regular season. More so, like because we've seen what they can do, and the roster hasn't changed all but too much from previous seasons. And Jimmy, you just can't count him out in the playoffs. He always comes alive in the playoffs, and we talked about that on the last episode of the podcast as well, mainly focusing on Jimmy Butler. But it'll be so interesting because we're gonna probably get some really close games, and the point differentials are gonna be so small. Like we're gonna have the Celtics probably winning a few by 3 points, 2 points, five maybe, something like that, and we're probably gonna see a lot of overtimes maybe. Um, just because of how clutch a lot of players are on both teams. And it'll be really cool to see, Tyler Hero back in the playoff action. Bam, and then you've got obviously Jason Tatum. Can't not talk about the Celtics. So, and they're a really strong team. So, we're looking at a strong team versus a mediocre-ish regular season team. But these can always make for exciting playoff experiences. So I'm hyped for this one a lot.
Yeah, I think one of the added aspects of this that makes this kind of a cool matchup is that also Boston hasn't played as great recently.
Right.
They've kind of been sliding down a little bit. I mean, obviously, I don't think they're not gonna be like, the third seed or anything
Right.
necessarily. I mean, although Philly's, getting kind of close, but
Very much.
um, I don't think at this point they're gonna catch the Bucks. I mean, it's only 2.5 games back, but it does feel like, that Boston might be coasting a little bit, and they've also just had some really weird games recently. They had that game where they lost to Houston.
Right.
Um, and they were trailing for most of the game. So, that's kind of, I mean, stuff like that can happen, but it just feels like Boston's had some strange games as of late, and
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like they're quite as dominant as they were earlier in the year. So you almost kind of do wonder if a team like Miami that can kind of, if they catch fire at the right time and Jimmy Butler starts to play like a superstar in the playoffs,
Hmm.
maybe that might be a real problem.
Right.
And, if the standings continue as they are, Miami is 7, and Boston is the 2nd seed. So obviously Miami, they'd be in the play-in, and if they win it outright, then they're the 7th seed, and then they'd play Boston in the first round. And it's just kind of odd because they played them last year in the conference finals, and at times the series didn't feel as close as it was, but then you kind of look back and it was like it was a 7-game series, and Jimmy Butler was a made shot away from potentially sending
Yeah.
Boston home. Even though again, despite the fact that it felt like Boston was the better team for most of the series, it just, I don't know. Miami had some times where they kind of, like you said, battled back, hit some big shots, but it is kind of fascinating just to see how Miami's changed this year. They haven't been as good, obviously, because that's why they're the 7th seed.
Right.
Um, the guys that they signed in the offseason didn't really pan out. Dwayne Dedman's gone because he didn't really do much for them.
Right.
Oladipo's kind of been up and down, but he just hasn't been able to return to form like he was in Indiana. Kevin Love, they signed him as a starter, and he's been up and down, mediocre,
Right.
okay, but I don't know. That wasn't necessarily the role that I thought he was gonna have.
Yeah.
I thought he was gonna come off the bench as opposed to start, but,
Yeah. That's
um,
crazy to me.
yeah, but, either way, you don't wanna necessarily count them out, and you also have the chess match between Spoelstra and Mazzulla.
Yeah, that'll be
Obviously,
really
'cause
cool.
Spoelstra is one of the best coaches in the league. Mazzulla's been solid this year, obviously, with Boston, but, there are a lot of people that are kinda questioning some of the decisions he's made late in games, say like Marcus Smart. A lot of Boston fans feel like maybe Derek White should be playing more than Marcus Smart at
Right.
this point because it seems like he hasn't had as good of a season this year.
Right.
But you never know, right? Because every coach has these stretches where, fans of each team kind of, say that they're not doing a good job. So we'll just have to see. And maybe Marcus Smart starts to play better. But regardless, I think it's a fun matchup because they've played multiple times in the playoffs and it's usually, a really good series.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely a great pick.
Yeah. If this series comes to fruition and you're watching the playoffs, you need to mark this on your calendar. I'm telling you, we're going to get some really good games out of it.
Yeah. So for my third matchup, I have Clippers Suns. Obviously, I guess another, semi honorable mention would be Warriors Suns, but
Oh, yeah, for
I had
sure.
Clippers Suns just because Kawhi Leonard versus Kevin Durant. Obviously, the Clippers, right, have been playing much better as of late. They started off with what after signing Russ, losing 4 or 5 in a row. Since then, they've won 4 in a row. I had a big win over the Warriors last night, right? That's pretty key for the standings, right? Because they
Yeah.
were tied. If the Warriors win, they would have had the tiebreaker and probably would have moved up in the standings above them. But the Clippers have it, although we'll have to see. But obviously those two guys haven't played against each other since the finals in 2019, and Durant got hurt in those finals.
Yep.
And obviously Durant's on a completely different team now with Phoenix, right? Of course, Chris Paul getting to play against the Clippers again. Of course, Russell Westbrook, I guess, getting to play against Kevin Durant. That's kind of
Another
interesting.
storyline.
Another storyline, right? And it's just again, just a lot of really good players, guys that can make a lot of big shots, right? Kawhi's a very an incredible shot maker. Durant's
Right.
obviously one of the best to ever do it. Of course, Devin Booker, right? It's going to be interesting to see Kawhi and Paul George trying to guard Durant and Booker. I think those are probably the guys that are going to have to spend the most time on them.
Yep.
So I just think that's going to be a really cool series. I mean, I would rather see Phoenix have home court advantage just because it
Same.
feels like where the Clippers are at home, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of energy all the time. But I think again, you can't go wrong with this one. I think this would be a great matchup, especially just considering the talent on the floor and all the storylines, like I mentioned.
Yeah. There's so many superstars that are going to be on the floor if this matchup, ends up happening. Um, but honestly, like if you look at the West, the Clippers might be the only team that could potentially lock up the Suns, position by position, in my opinion. So, like you said, you'd have Paul George matching up with whoever, and then Kawhi Leonard probably on KD. Um, I think Aiton would probably be the X factor in that
Yeah.
series, but you know, you never know with him because he can be a little inconsistent. But
Right.
that's all. That's what the playoffs are for, man. That's where you make your mark and live up to the moment. But that's going to be a really fun series too. I can't wait to see that one.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, Monty Williams against Ty Lue.
Yeah, that'll be
I
cool.
think those two guys are really good coaches.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all right, your matchup.
Yeah. So my matchup is the long-awaited one. I know, you hinted at the Warriors, so we might as well start off with it or lead into it. And it's Grizzlies Warriors.
Yeah.
This has been a long time coming. It's been brewing for years. And the rivalry has been, you know, basically amplified this season. With all the trash talk between Draymond, Dylan Brooks,
Yeah.
um, everybody. Everybody's kind of chimed in on this one, and this is the one that everybody wants to see. I think there's nobody that
Yeah.
doesn't want to see this one because you've got Steph, and the
Ja.
Warriors, Ja,
Yep.
and it's just
Mm.
going to be a great matchup. And I think they've played each other multiple times this season,
Yeah,
and
3.
yeah, and the outcomes have been a little interesting. Um,
Mm.
but man, I don't know who I would take in this one because the
Yeah.
Warriors haven't looked too great.
Mhm.
But I don't believe in Memphis yet. There's a
Right.
lot of people that think they're frauds. I'm not going to go as far to say that they're frauds, but I'm
Right.
just not as confident in them as I think other people are. But I
Right.
don't know. It's going to be an interesting series because there's going to be a lot of popcorn. There's just going to be a lot of fireworks. It's going to be crazy, and
Mhm.
it's going to be a defensive one, I think, because you're gonna have to have Jaren Jackson down there, and then you're gonna have to have Draymond and Looney, whoever's down there, and there's a lot of X factors in this game too. But it could really go either way, just
Yeah.
just from right now.
I think, yeah, definitely with this matchup, it could go either way. I mean, Golden State, they've been one of the worst teams on the road. I think the only teams worse than them on the road are the Rockets and the Spurs, right? And
Yeah,
those are two of the worst teams in
bottom
the
teams.
NBA. So that's not necessarily great company to be in. But then at home, they're one of the best. So obviously, if they play the Grizzlies in the playoffs, they wouldn't have home court
Nope.
advantage, so that would be a huge concern. But then with the Grizzlies, you don't always trust their half court offense.
Right.
Their shooting has been really up and down, and that can be a problem. And it's a young team that doesn't have a lot of veteran experience, so
Right.
that can always be an issue as well. We don't know when Adams will be back. Um, but then even again, with the Warriors road things, but then the other thing you have to factor in is Wiggins, right? Because he's been
Yeah.
out for a while. We don't necessarily know what's going on with him. Not that we need to know, but we hope everything's going okay. But we don't know when he'll be back, right? Some people think he'll be back, and then others don't think he'll be back, right? If he doesn't come back, right, then I don't really think that they're going to be able to beat Memphis just because I think when he's there, I think he's their second best player, one of their best defensive players
I
outside
think
of
he's the
Draymond.
best. I think
Yeah,
he's better, honestly, if you want me to be frank. And
sure.
Iguodala's out too.
Yeah, exactly. But I didn't necessarily factor him as much,
Yeah.
even though they've been playing him. But
Right.
yeah, because again, Wiggins on the wing, right? He's kind of the guy that in the finals last year, right? He's the guy that turned it around, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
he was able to match Tatum and Brown in terms of playing them defensively and getting it done on the glass, getting second chance opportunities, getting to the free throw line. So they need him, right? Because they're a team that doesn't draw a lot of fouls, and that fouls a lot, right? And
Right.
that changes a little bit if Wiggins is there. Even though he's not a great free throw shooter, but again, having a guy that can get to the basket and get to the line, other than just Steph or Poole, helps. So for that, I think that's kind of the X factor
Yeah.
there. But either way, regardless, it would still be a really fun competitive series just because of all the, like you said, the fireworks and
Yeah.
the rivalries and all the history between those two teams. And of course, Memphis, the other X factor obviously is Dylan Brooks, right? So if he
Oh
plays,
God.
yeah, so if he doesn't play that well, right, then that obviously hurts, right? But if he actually
Yeah.
plays well, then that makes it better. But you don't know what you're gonna get with him, right? Because he's
Right.
so up and down. But
Yeah.
either way, I think that's definitely a great matchup pick.
Yeah, it's gonna be so much fun to watch. I hope it
Yeah,
happens. I'm praying on that.
right.
That's the one that I'm just like needs to happen.
Yeah. Well, right now, I think the Warriors are 6th, so they'd have to be 7th. Well,
Right.
unless Memphis is 3rd. I guess Memphis might be 3rd right now,
Memphis
so
is
that could
third right
happen.
now. Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Well, then, yeah, so it could
Oh,
happen.
that would be
So,
fantastic, bro.
yeah. So for my last matchup, it was kind of hard between Lakers Nuggets, Lakers Kings, but I went with Lakers Kings just because I think that would be a really fun competitive series. I know we've talked about the Kings where we don't necessarily know what they're gonna do come postseason
Right.
time, but they've still been playing really well. They're one of the clutchest, I think the clutchest team in the
Definitely.
NBA, right? De'Aaron Fox, I think, has the highest clutch rating in the NBA.
Crazy.
Their offense is incredible. Obviously, they're not very good defensively, but you never know. This team, if they get it going offensively, you're just not going to be able to stop them.
Malik Monk.
But I think it still would be a fun matchup just with LeBron and AD against, Fox and Sabonis. The Lakers have had one of the top defenses since they've made the trade at the trade deadline. So I just think a lot of cool stories. Of course, Lakers Kings have had a rivalry for a really long time, even though they haven't played each other in the playoffs, right? Obviously, everybody knows the series that happened
Right.
in the early 2000s. So I just think it'd be kind of cool if that were to happen again, especially with these two new look teams. Obviously, it's kind of an uphill battle for the Lakers right now because they're currently 10th. And in order for them to play the Kings, they'd have to be the 7th seed, and that makes it difficult. But still, only a couple games back, so you never know. So anything's possible. But
Yeah.
I think this would be a really cool matchup just because of all the storylines involved. And again, you got to, be happy for Sacramento just because of what they've been able to accomplish this year. Because again, I thought they'd be solid, but not one of the best teams in the Western Conference record-wise. So I think that's definitely my matchup that I'm keeping my eyes on, just because I just want to see a really interesting team play the Kings, and I think the Lakers are one of those. Just because we haven't also seen a whole lot of them at full strength, right? LeBron's been out,
Right.
so we don't necessarily know what they're going to look like when they're completely whole. They only played, I think, 2 or 3 games together whole, right? Because they
Yeah.
played one, I think, against the Pelicans, right, where they blew them out.
Yep.
And then I think they had the game against Golden State, right? But D'Angelo Russell got hurt,
Yeah.
so
Yep.
he didn't really get to play. So we don't really have a big sample size, but I think it'd be really cool to see.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And, I might be kind of reaching for narratives here, but it would also be kind of cool, to potentially see, an older LeBron face a higher seed, and, further solidify his legacy. That would be really cool to see. I think that's another talking point. And then also it's a test for the Kings because you can never count LeBron out in the playoffs, like no matter what. So, and my thing is with the Kings, who's guarding LeBron? You know, and I don't think the Kings defense is that good in my opinion, but
Or even AD.
yeah, like who's guarding LeBron, who's guarding AD, and then if you even manage to shut those guys down, who's guarding D'Lo, So that's what it comes down to, and I think the teams match up so interestingly. Like that's the cool thing. Like the lineups are going to be really cool to see in the playoffs. It's going to be a coaching battle as well. We talked about Mike Brown. He's got to figure out some weaknesses that the Lakers may have, and this is all hypothetical, so it's not set in stone. But if this were to happen, Mike Brown would have his work cut out for him because you've got to go up against LeBron and Anthony God dang Davis.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Crazy.
think the Kings have the coaching advantage, but I'd say
Yeah,
the
for
Lakers
sure.
probably have the star power advantage.
Yep. So it'll be fun. I mean, it'll be a good one if it happens.
Right.
And then for my last matchup, this is an interesting one. Nuggets Mavs.
Oh yeah.
So for this one, I think it's a little bit more interesting than the Lakers Kings one, only
Sure.
because we could potentially be seeing Luka versus Jokic, man.
Yeah.
Like that would be crazy,
Mhm.
And the Nuggets, we've said it multiple times on the podcast. They have a couple question marks, but the Mavericks have question marks too with the defense, and we don't even know if the Kyrie and Luka chemistry is even gonna solidify come playoff time. So
Right.
I think this is like a testing water for the Dallas Mavericks, but also a huge test for Denver because both of those guys, Kyrie and Luka, are prone to get hot and they are very clutch. So we have to watch out for that if you're a Nuggets fan or Nuggets supporter or whatever, or if you're just rooting for the Nuggets. But yeah, it'll be cool because I'm not sure how well Dallas can match up with the Nuggets. Jokic is gonna probably go off, and Aaron Gordon too, and Jamal Murray, MPJ. They'll probably all have really solid games, but yeah, it's gonna be Kyrie and Luka shouldering the load on this one. But I'm excited to see it because it's playoffs, man. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, you got 2 of the best European players in the league going at it.
Exactly.
And then it's kind of interesting because both teams kind of have weaknesses, right, in terms of the positions that they'd have to guard,
Right.
right? Because obviously, with Denver, obviously you have Caldwell Pope who's a good defender, Bruce Brown who's a good defender, but I don't necessarily know what they can do against Luca just
Not
because of the
much.
size advantage. And then of
Yeah.
course Dallas, right, doesn't really have any bigs capable of matching up physically with Jokic. Dwight Powell,
Yeah.
Christian Wood, right? Those guys. I don't think they're
No.
going to be able to do a whole lot. But again, you do have to factor in they have a lot of guys, right? Where defensively you do kind of wonder what the answer
Right.
for them is going to be. I think with Denver, they like to play up and down more than Dallas does. I think Kyrie likes to play up and down sometimes,
Yeah.
but not many of the other guys want to do that a whole lot. Hardaway obviously can spot up in transition, but other than that, like I just don't necessarily know. And again, Luca and Kyrie haven't played a whole lot of games together, right?
Exactly.
Because they've been hurt, and that's kind of also an issue with say like a team like Phoenix that we didn't even mention, right? Where you're going into the playoffs, right, with your best guys having barely played alongside each other, and that's kind of a disadvantage in the playoffs. When you're going against other teams like Denver that have a ton of continuity, right? These guys have played together for years at this point,
Right.
so that definitely makes things difficult. But either way, right, it is kind of a series that you do wonder about because you feel like it could go either way. I do feel like Denver has the advantage because
Oh
I just
yeah.
think Denver's the better team.
Yeah.
Because I just don't think the Dallas thing has really worked out. But you never know come playoff time, right? Because how many people thought that the Mavericks would beat the Suns, right? So you just
Yeah.
never know, right? If your best players go off and sorely outplay the other guys, right? You have a chance if you have the best player on the floor and a decent team.
Yeah.
So I think that would definitely be an entertaining matchup, just because of contrast of two different styles, because those two teams are very different from each other.
Yeah. It's really gonna come down to, I guess, a better way to describe the
Yeah,
matchup is really Luca versus Jokic, bro. Like I
yeah,
think
it
that's the
really
better way to
Yeah,
describe it.
it really does come down to the role players, which
True.
it does tend to do that in a lot of series, but like in this type of series, you do wonder, right? Because Michael Porter Jr. is gonna have to step up, Aaron Gordon's gonna have to step up,
Right.
right? You're gonna probably need some good games out of say like a KCP or Bruce Brown, right? Jamal
Right.
Murray, obviously. And then same thing for Dallas, right? Tim Hardaway Jr. is gonna have to, he's been in the playoffs, he's been up and down, but he's had some really good playoff performances for Dallas, right?
Right.
Reggie Bullock's, kind of, up and down in terms of his production, so you don't know what you're going to get out of him, but still, um, I think it would still be a really fun matchup.
Yeah. That's exactly why I picked it. It's gonna be great if it happens.
Yeah. So moving on into some more NBA news. So it seems like Bogdan Bogdanovich, my bad.
A little
Uh,
confusing sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, it's all right. So it seems like according to Woj and Shams, it seems like that he's going to have a 4-year, $68 million extension. This one is kind of surprising, and it's not necessarily that he's not that good, because I think he's a fine player.
Yeah.
But he's already about 30, right? So he's getting kind of up there in age, right? So a 4-year extension is going to put him into that 33, 34 range. Still getting paid a decent amount of money, and it's also just strange because they paid Kevin Herter and then they traded him. And he's been doing really good in Sacramento. So it just
Yeah.
feels like a very bizarre situation to trade, in my opinion, the better player, right? And then pay a guy who's not as good, a semi-similar player, but he's different, but
Right.
still, I just don't understand, what the reasoning behind that was, right? I don't know why, as a team like Atlanta, who is a young team, wouldn't just keep the young player as opposed to trading him away and then
Right.
paying the older player. Because I can understand if you didn't want to pay him because of the money, but then why pay Bogdanovich?
Right.
Unless maybe the plan is to trade him in the future. But this one doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Again, Atlanta's just been really strange this season, so you don't know what to expect from them. But I didn't really expect this.
Yeah. If you want my honest opinion, I think they kind of overpaid him a little bit, and I don't really understand him being there long term. To be honest, I think that there's better out there that they could get, and like you said, I don't really understand the Kevin Herter move either because why would you do that? You're just kind of digging yourself a small hole, but I'm sure they'll climb out of it in the next few years. But I mean, he's a really good player, but just not as good as Herter, like you said. And I'm not sure what this is going to entail for the future, because that's a decent chunk of money for a guy like that, in my opinion. But
Right.
we'll see where it goes, and I hope Atlanta can figure it out. It seems like they've got a whole plethora of problems that goes beyond Trey Young and the coach. So we'll see what goes down.
Yeah. I mean, I guess essentially he'd be getting paid probably around what he's making right now. Of course, we'll have to wait until we see, the terms of the contract,
Right.
and how it's structured. But still, like I said, it does seem like a strange deal.
Yeah. Very.
Yeah. Moving on to Lonzo Ball, we got some more, rough news from him. According to Shams, it seems like he's going to have another surgery on his knee, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And this surgery is going to put him out potentially through almost or most of, if not all of next season. So we may not potentially see him until like the 2024-2025 season. And it's just been really tough because again, it's his third surgery on the same knee. He hasn't played since January, I think, of last year.
Yeah.
And, it was a real red flag when they were reporting that, it seemed like even just walking up the stairs, he was having knee pain. And it was also just a red flag because every time, it was reported that, we didn't know when he's coming back. That also just seemed odd. So
Right.
it seems like it's kind of been building up to this. And it just sucks for a guy who has gotten better every year, and has really changed himself into a really good player. But now he just can't stay on the floor. And you just kind of wonder what his future is. It was
Right.
reported that for him, there were literal concerns about his ability to continue to play.
Right.
And that's potentially why they decided to go with this surgery. Because again, it makes sense if you want to continue to play basketball, which I assume he wants to do, right? Obviously it's not a fun thing to do to have another surgery and be out because you want to play, but it seems like he's going to have to do that.
Yeah.
Just a really sad, unfortunate story about, a guy that does seem like a good guy, and a really good player.
Yeah. It really is unfortunate. And, this is like maybe our eighth time covering Lonzo Ball on this
Right.
situation in particular.
Exactly.
So that tells you how much this is, or how long this has gone on.
Right.
And it's really sad because now the time is being extended and
Yeah.
we don't his future is quite literally up in the air,
Right.
unfortunately. And then you have to start asking the negative hypotheticals. If he even plays, will he be a shade of what he is
Right.
right now, or what he was when he was healthy? It's
Yeah.
sad, but we all we can do about it is pray and
Right.
continue to hope,
Quote.
and yeah, and continue to hope that
Mhm.
he's gonna get better. But this also puts Chicago in a tough spot too, because
Yeah.
now they potentially have to figure out a real deal point guard, kind of, I guess, insurance. I don't know. They've got to figure it out. So
Yeah, and I
there's
don't
a
think
bunch of
Patrick Bev
factors.
yeah, and I don't necessarily think Patrick Beverley is the long-term
No,
solution to
he's
that.
not the answer.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate. Yeah, because again, like, this was a team that was really promising a couple seasons ago, and
Hmm.
now we don't know what direction they're gonna go, right?
Right.
Because again, like you said, even though he might be back, 2 seasons from now, right? We don't know what he's gonna look like when he
Right.
comes back. I can't imagine he would right away look the same.
No.
And again, like you said, we had talked about it a lot, and it just seemed like each time something came out, it just seemed like it was just gradually getting worse and worse. So, just unfortunate situation for everybody involved, especially him, because
Yeah.
I'm sure he wants to go out there and be able to play.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, his play style. He's a semi-athletic guy. He can jump. He's fast, and he's a point guard, and you need the most mobility that you can have at the point guard position. So
Right.
it just keeps on piling on, and it just doesn't look good right now. But like I said, all we could do is hope and pray. So
Right. And then moving on to our last story, which actually, funny enough, was reported right as we were getting on to
yeah.
record. So it appears that Michael Jordan, right, team governor for the Charlotte Hornets,
Oh God.
yeah, is apparently planning to sell a majority stake of his team, according to Woj. So he's still going to be a minority owner, but he's going to sell a big part of his stake to two guys who are minority owners for other teams. So I believe one of them is, I believe his name is Plotkin, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other one is, yeah, Gabe Plotkin and Rick Schnall,
Yeah.
right? So Plotkin is a minority owner for the Hornets, and then Schnall is a minority owner for the Hawks. So obviously, it's kind of a unexpected, in my opinion, situation. It didn't really seem like there was really any momentum, but of course, we didn't necessarily know.
Right.
But it's been just a really bizarre stretch for Charlotte since Jordan's been the team governor. It seems like he's done a really poor job. I mean, we can go over it. I mean, there's like a ton of decisions that he had made in previous years, right? Drafting Adam Morrison right back in the mid 2000s over, say, like a guy like a Brandon Roy. Um, if you want to keep going, right, we can say he drafted guys like, say, DJ Augustine, right? Didn't necessarily pan out.
Right.
Kemba Walker was fine, right? But not much else after that, right? Michael Kidd Gilchrist, not even really in the league. Same draft as AD, Bradley Beal.
Yeah.
Cody Zeller, right? Noah Vonleh, Kaminsky. Traded Shea Gilgeous-Alexander for Miles Bridges, right? Who's again not even on the roster right now.
Right.
Um, PJ Washington, fine. LaMelo Ball, pretty good, right? But Book Knight, I mean, obviously he's still young, but Mark Williams, good. But, and again, we didn't even go into all the free agency and trade acquisitions, but I just think he's done a really poor job. So, I mean, if he sells his majority stake and I guess somebody else decides to take over, maybe they'll do a better job. But I also don't think you could necessarily do much worse. But definitely the most surprising story of the day.
Yeah. And I have some reserved thoughts that I'm probably going to keep to myself, but I'm going to keep it short and sweet. He messed up my Wizards too, so I know what this is about. I've
Yeah,
been
Kwame
there.
Brown.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't even really name the Wizards guys that he got in there, but
Yeah.
and we don't really even need to. But he
No.
does have a history with this.
Yeah.
This is not the first time that he's messed up, and I think it is time for him to take a step back and let others make some decisions because they haven't been good in a long time, unfortunately, because it's a nice city and they have some likable players,
Right.
and it's just sad, and
Mm.
this is the right move in my opinion. So
Yeah.
hopefully they can make some headway and get this done ASAP so they can really start to rebuild and fortify the roster because there's some core
Yeah.
pieces there that are pretty good.
Right. If we're talking about the Bobcat/Hornets history, I think they've only had 2 playoff appearances in their entire, I guess, 15
Yeah.
something years of existence, right? 17 years, something like that. Yeah, because I think they had one in the mid late 2000s, right, where it was Gerald Wallace,
Yeah.
Steven Jackson,
Yeah.
right, and then they had the one
Was it with
I guess
Kemba?
back in 2015, yeah, something like
Kemba.
that, where it was
Yeah.
Kemba Walker, right, the declining Al Jefferson
Right.
era, right? So again, it's been almost 20 years and they've only had 2 playoff appearances. So I mean, that's not really a great resume in my
Yeah.
opinion. And like you said, you also mentioned the Wizards, right? And there's not a great record for that either, right? Which we don't necessarily have to get into all of them,
Nope.
but right, Kwame Brown is just a little teaser. So
Yeah. That's all you need to know. I mean, that
yeah,
speaks for itself. And I get it. It's your home state, whatever you want to make it proud. You want to do something for the state, whatever, cool. But maybe take a minor role and let the decision makers really make the decisions because it doesn't seem like it's very coherent with him, unfortunately. But it is what it is. And like I said, hopefully they move swiftly with this so they can really get a rebuild going.
well, I guess that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. We all appreciate the support
Yeah.
with the videos and the shorts and the content that we continue to give everybody. So thanks for listening. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.